Some experiences don't end when the danger passes. They don't fade with time. They stay, quietly, waiting for the moment you remember them again. These are not urban legends. These are not ghost stories told for fun. These are real experiences from people who were in the wrong place at the wrong time and walked away knowing how close they were to never leaving. Back in 2017, I had moved to a small town in rural Illinois, and I only knew one person there. I've always been more introverted, so making friends wasn't easy, especially being single in my early 20s and living in a town where most of the population was retired. The one person I did know, I'll call her Clara, introduced me to an older couple who were looking for someone to dog sit while they were away. They were probably in their early 50s. Clara thought it would be a good way for me to earn some money and maybe start building connections in town. We arranged to meet at their house first so I could see the place and meet the dogs. The house was a 1970s brick ranch, very outdated, slightly run down in some areas. But honestly, it didn't bother me much. At that point in my life, I explored abandoned houses for fun, so this felt tame by comparison. The dogs were sweet and friendly. The couple, though, was strange. They were polite enough, but whenever I spoke to them, they rarely made eye contact. Instead, they slowly scanned me from head to toe, almost like they were evaluating me. When they showed me around the house, they didn't explain anything. They would open a door, let me look inside, then quietly close it and move on. They also mentioned, very casually, that they sold firearms out of their home as a side business. That part didn't really bother me. What did bother me was the cameras. They were everywhere. Outside, hallways, living room, kitchen, office, garage, backyard, driveway, even pointed toward the kitchen table. They told me it was for insurance reasons because of the firearms business. It made me uneasy, but at the time I was desperate to make money and hoped this might help me feel less isolated in town. So I ignored the red flags. Eventually, the time came for me to stay at the house and watch the dogs. They left for a week. I worked from home, so I settled in quickly. I set up my workspace in their office, which had a monitor displaying all the outdoor camera feeds. Oddly enough, that actually made me feel safer. The property was fairly large, surrounded by woods, and being alone out there felt less intimidating knowing I could see outside. The dogs had a doggy door and could go in and out whenever they wanted. The house backed directly up to the woods. The first night went by without any issues. The second night, I noticed one of the cameras, the one facing the driveway, had gone offline. I didn't think too much of it at first. Rural Wi-Fi can be unreliable. Still, I decided to check just in case. As I walked toward the back door, the dog suddenly jumped up and rushed through the doggy door, barking aggressively. It was around 10 p.m., and that instantly put me on edge. They were barking at the same spot along the fence, the section that bordered the woods. I didn't see anything out there, but my stomach dropped anyway. I managed to coax them back inside with treats and blocked the doggy door with a heavy chair, one that weighed enough that I knew the dogs couldn't move it. Then I went to bed. The next morning, I woke up late and jumped straight into work. That's when I noticed something was wrong. The dogs weren't at the foot of the bed. The house was silent. I called their names, no response. When I walked to the back door, I saw them outside in the yard, acting completely normal. That's when it hit me. How did they get outside? I slowly turned my head and saw the chair I had placed in front of the doggy door, now sitting in the corner of the room, more than 5 feet away. My heart dropped. I immediately called Clara and told her everything. I begged her to come over and help me search the house, because there was no way the dogs could have moved that chair. She arrived about 20 minutes later. I rushed to let her in, and we went room by room through the house. We found nothing. No signs of anyone being there, no doors unlocked, no windows open. She tried to calm me down, suggesting maybe I hadn't blocked the door as well as I thought. I didn't fully believe that explanation, but I accepted it enough to push through. Clara left, and I went back to work, on high alert. The rest of the day passed quietly, and eventually I started to relax again. That night, after dinner, I sat down in the office and happened to glance at the camera monitor. Every camera was offline. All of them. That was different. One camera going out made sense. All of them didn't. Given the nature of their firearms business, I texted the couple to let them know the cameras were down and offered to troubleshoot if they wanted. I hated not being able to see outside. Hours passed with no response. They were on vacation, so I tried to let it go. Close to midnight, I was watching TV when the dog suddenly scrambled to the doggy door again. My heart started racing. I jumped up, grabbed the knife I kept by the bed, and went to the back door. I looked out into the yard. Nothing. The dog stopped barking and started sniffing along the fence. I whisper-yelled for them to come back inside. That's when I heard a loud thump from the opposite side of the house. I froze. I had to make a decision fast. Check the noise or get the dogs inside first. I chose the dogs. I didn't want them chasing some animal and getting sprayed or injured. Once they were inside, I blocked the doggy door again. This time, I took a photo of the chair for proof. Then I walked toward the back room where the noise had come from. The moment I stepped inside, I felt it. That unmistakable sense that someone else was there. It wasn't a sound. It wasn't movement. It was a change in the atmosphere, like the silence itself was disturbing. I didn't go any farther. I called out, "Who's there? What are you doing here?" No answer. I called the couple's names, wondering if there was any chance they were home early. Nothing. I considered calling the police, but felt embarrassed. What if it was nothing? What if I was overreacting? I quietly backed out of the room, closed the door, and locked it. Then I sat in the living room with the dogs, knife in one hand and phone in the other, unable to decide what to do. About 20 minutes later, I got a text from the wife. "Don't worry about the cameras, you're safe." That message alone didn't make sense. They were in Florida. It was nearly 2 a.m. Then another message came through. "Can you check if I left the garage door open inside? I don't want anything getting in." The garage door she was referring to was in the room I had just locked. I didn't respond. 2 minutes later, another text. "I know it's late, but can you please check for me? I'm worried." My gut was screaming no, but part of me wondered if maybe an animal had gotten in. I stood up, knife and phone still in hand, and approached the door. I heard a shuffle from inside the room. I stopped and listened. Then my phone buzzed again. "You're up." That's when it hit me. They could still see me. I forgot about the hallway and living room cameras. With my heart pounding, I unlocked the door and opened it as slowly as I could, stretching my arms out to keep as much distance as possible. At first, I didn't see anything. The garage door was open. The garage itself was pitch black. As I stepped closer, my phone lit up with a notification. The faint glow illuminated part of the doorway, and I saw it. An arm, pressed flat against the wall beside the garage door. I ran. I slammed the door shut, locked it, grabbed my keys, and bolted out the front door. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely unlock my car. That's when I saw the garage door starting to open. My headlights lit the inside. In the back corner, a grown man in a jacket was crouched behind a box watching me. I didn't hesitate. I threw the car in reverse and drove straight to the police station. I was crying when I explained everything. Officers went to check the house. I waited in my car and texted the wife again, telling her what happened. No response. About 30 minutes later, the officer returned and said the garage door was open, but the house was clear. No signs of forced entry, nothing unusual around the property. They offered to follow me back and check again with me present. After that second check, I still couldn't sleep. It was nearly 4 a.m. I laid on the couch with the dogs, gripping the knife. 20 minutes later, I received another text. Plans changed. We're coming home early. You can leave. I didn't question it. I packed up and left immediately. As I drove toward the main road, I looked in my rearview mirror and saw a car with no headlights pull into their driveway. I texted her, "Someone just pulled into your driveway." The reply came instantly, "I know." That's when it clicked. They had been nearby the entire time. The dogs barking, the cameras going offline, the messages. I never heard from them again. Clara apologized repeatedly. She said she only knew them as quiet regulars at the local diner, and after that incident, they never showed up there again. I'm 30 now, and I still think about it. I know I'm safe, but knowing I was seconds away from something I don't even want to imagine, that feeling never really goes away. I work as a bartender at a bar and restaurant in a suburb just outside Baltimore. I'm going to explain the layout real quick because it matters. It's a busy place with a weird system. There are no waiters, just bartenders like me and the cooks in the back. If you want food or even a soda, you order it at the bar. When it's ready, you pick it up from the counter yourself. I don't know why management does it this way. I'm guessing it's cheaper for them, but it keeps everything moving fast, and honestly, I like fast. For some reason, the place is insanely popular. I wouldn't call it special, but it stays packed. Most nights, the vibe is loud music, non-stop chatter, people standing near the DJ booth, dancing, talking, flirting, just constant motion. It makes the shift fly by. I like meeting new people, so it's a good fit. If things ever slow down too much, I start going crazy. That night was a weekend, so I knew it would be chaos. And it was. After a certain hour, the bar filled up with a younger crowd, college types. That means more dancing, more spilled drinks, more drama, and usually worse tips. There was one group in particular ordering tequila shots like it was their only mission in life. I couldn't even keep up with the salt and limes. One of them was so drunk he used the same pickup line on me 3 separate times like I wouldn't notice. I was in that mode where your body's moving and your brain is running on autopilot. Pour, wipe, ring it up, turn, smile, repeat. And then I noticed them. An elderly couple walked in and sat down in the corner booth. At first, I didn't think much of it. It was just unusual. This place is loud and rowdy, and they looked like they belonged in a quiet diner, not a bar with a DJ. But I didn't have time to stare. I kept working. Maybe 30 minutes passed. Could have been an hour. I don't know. Time gets weird when you're slammed. I was halfway through lining up drinks, gin and tonics, I think, when I glanced up again and my brain snagged on them for some reason. They were sitting perfectly still, not leaning in to talk, not looking at menus, not laughing, not checking their phones, just sitting. And they hadn't ordered anything. No food, no drinks, nothing. I would have remembered because I'm the one who takes the orders. I looked closer and realized something else. They weren't even looking at each other. They were staring at the wall beside their booth, like statues, like they were watching something that wasn't there. It was so strange that it made my stomach tighten, but I told myself the most logical thing. Maybe they didn't understand how the place worked. Maybe they were waiting for a server that doesn't exist. Eventually, I got a tiny break, not a full break, just a moment where the bar wasn't actively on fire. So I walked over. I put on my polite smile and approached the booth. And the weirdest part was, neither of them turned to look at me as I walked up. They stayed locked on the wall. I cleared my throat and asked if they wanted anything to eat or drink. The woman didn't move at all. No flinch, no blink, nothing, like I hadn't spoken. The man turned his head slowly, unnaturally slow, until he faced me. And the second I saw his face, I got chills. His skin looked pale and thin, like it was stretched too tight. Deep wrinkles, eyes sunken back into his face like dark holes. He didn't say a word. He just stared at me and shook his head once, firm, silent. Something about the way he looked at me made my stomach twist, like my body was warning me. I mumbled something like, "Okay, no problem," and walked away fast. Back behind the bar, I tried to shake it off, but I kept feeling watched. Not just they're looking at me,
more like a heavy awareness, like I had been noticed. I didn't look back at that booth for a while after that. Eventually, the rush dipped a little. People were still there, but it wasn't shoulder to shoulder anymore. And then I remembered the couple. I glanced over without thinking, and I almost dropped the glass in my hand. They were both staring directly at me now. Not at the bar, not at the room, not past me. At me. I made eye contact with the woman, and she didn't look away. No expression, no curiosity, just a fixed stare like she was studying me. My skin went cold. I turned away and pretended to be busy, trying to act normal. I told myself I was being dramatic. Maybe they were just weird. Maybe they were high. Maybe they were mentally unwell. I looked back again. The booth was empty. They were gone. I felt relief so strong it almost made me dizzy. As bad as it sounds, I was just glad they weren't in there anymore. The rest of the shift finished like normal, but that moment stuck with me like a splinter. Even while closing down, wiping counters, stacking mats, I kept replaying their faces. My coworker, Karen, was closing with me. She's a veteran. She's been there for years, and she notices everything. She remembers who came in, who tipped, who caused drama, all of it, like a human security camera. So I asked her casually, "Did you see that older couple in the corner booth earlier?" Karen looked confused. "What older couple?" I laughed like it was no big deal and said, "The elderly couple. They were sitting over there for a while." She shook her head. "I didn't see any old couple." At first, I thought she was messing with me, but her face was dead serious. She even joked, "Are you hallucinating?" I laughed along, but inside I felt sick. I asked again, "Are you sure?" Karen crossed her arms and started listing random customers from the night, what they ordered, what they were wearing, who they were with, like she was proving a point. And she was good. Too good. She didn't mention the couple even once. By the time we locked up, I started doubting myself. I hated that feeling. I knew what I saw, but the confidence was slipping. I walked out to my car, keys in hand, trying to just get home and forget it. And then I saw them. Across the street, under a single streetlight, two dark figures were standing there. I didn't need to see their faces. I knew it was them. My chest tightened like someone had grabbed my lungs. I wanted to yell, but no sound came out. I moved on pure instinct. I jumped into my car, locked the doors, started it, and pulled out fast without looking back again. The drive home was awful. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. I kept whispering, "Oh my God," like a broken record. I kept running through the questions. How did Karen miss them? Were they even real? Was I losing my mind? I don't have an ending that ties it up neatly. I never saw them again. I never got an explanation. And honestly, I don't think I ever will.
I need to say this up front. This isn't my story. It's something my best friend told me years ago, and he told it the same way every time. I might mess up a small detail here or there, but the core of it has never changed. It's one of those stories that sticks with you, even when you wish it wouldn't. My friend's dad was a logger. Specifically, he operated a tree saw, the kind of massive machine used to cut down huge trees and slice them into exact lengths. It's brutal work, long hours, dangerous equipment, and most of the time you're completely isolated. The way his crew was paid mattered too. They weren't paid hourly, they were paid per tree. So his dad pushed himself hard, sometimes working 16 to 20 hours straight just to finish faster and make more money. Once he and his coworker finished cutting, another crew would come in later to clear and haul everything away. About half the time, he worked completely alone. The other half, he worked with another operator named Griffin. When they were separated on opposite ends of a site, they stayed in contact using radios. A few years back, the two of them were assigned to a new job site high up in the mountains of the Pacific Northwest. It was so remote that it took the company over 3 weeks just to carve out a road wide enough for trucks and equipment to reach it. By the time they started working, they were in a place that felt completely cut off from the rest of the world. They'd already been working there for about 10 days when the radio issues started. At first, it was just faint chatter, static-filled murmurs bleeding through the channel. It didn't sound like anyone they knew, and it didn't make sense. They assumed it was interference, so they switched channels. The voices followed. That's the first thing that bothered them. Anyone who's used a standard radio knows that shouldn't happen. Switching channels should cut off interference completely. But no matter what channel they switched to, the chatter came with them. As they moved farther up the mountain, the voices became clearer, but not clearer enough to understand fully. They could hear fragments of conversation, pieces of sentences, but nothing complete. What stood out was the tone. It sounded casual, calm, like two men talking about everyday tasks, and that made it worse. Around the same time, they started finding signs that someone else had been there before them. Empty containers, footprints, makeshift campsites tucked just off the work paths. This wasn't a place people casually wandered into. It was remote, difficult to reach, and completely uninhabited as far as anyone knew. One day, Griffin found something that made everything shift. Just off a narrow trail, partially hidden by brush, he spotted a tent. He radioed my friend's dad, and they decided to check it out together. Inside the tent, there was one sleeping bag and a duffel bag. And inside that duffel bag were things neither of them could explain away. Multiple pairs of children's underwear, rope, duct tape, and crude drawings. Disturbing sketches depicting children being abused. There were also photos of a fresh apple, recently taken, meaning whoever owned that tent hadn't been gone long. Griffin wanted to leave immediately. My friend's dad didn't. He was stubborn, obsessed with finishing jobs. He insisted they complete the work, but agreed they'd limit radio use to emergencies only. That night, they sat in their camper, neither of them able to sleep. The radio crackled to life again. This time, the voices were clearer. Two men talking about collecting water, gathering firewood, normal, everyday things. But now they knew. Whoever was on that radio was almost certainly connected to the tent. Griffin didn't seem as shaken. My friend's dad was spiraling. The next night, when the voices came back, my friend's dad snapped. He grabbed the radio and demanded to know who they were and what they were doing out there. The radio went dead. Instant silence. No response. And somehow, that silence felt worse than the voices. Griffin was furious. He told him he'd just announced their presence to people who clearly didn't want to be found. They argued, but eventually decided they'd escalate things the next day and report what they found. They never got the chance. Around midnight, Griffin shook my friend's dad awake and whispered that someone was outside. At first, he heard footsteps, slow, crunching on gravel. His heart started racing as he reached for his gun, only to realize it wasn't loaded. He couldn't find the ammunition. Griffin was unarmed. Calling the police was pointless. They were hours away from help. Then the camper door handle started to jiggle. The door creaked open slightly, but didn't swing inward. The camper was raised off the ground, and there was no ladder or step to climb up. Then came the scratching. Long, deliberate scratches dragged across the outside of the door. 4 minutes passed like that. 4 minutes of absolute terror. Finally, my friend's dad nodded at Griffin and moved toward the door with a flashlight shaking in his hand. The moment he reached it, the door burst open. He was slashed across the face with a knife. The pain dropped him instantly. He fell out of the camper and hit the ground hard. Before he could recover, one man was on top of him, pressing the blade to his neck. Another man appeared and started kicking him repeatedly in the head. Griffin didn't hesitate. He jumped out of the camper and tackled the man with the knife. The second attacker bolted into the woods. The first man broke free and followed. They vanished into the darkness. Griffin dragged my friend's dad back into the truck, and they drove nearly 2 hours to the nearest hospital. His injuries were severe. His face was shredded. A deep cut across his eyes permanently damaged his vision. They reported everything to the police. Nothing came of it. 2 weeks later, as the rest of the logging crew finished clearing the site, one of the workers was found bound, gagged, assaulted, and murdered in a ditch.
No suspects, no arrests. To this day, my friend's dad lives with PTSD. His damaged eye, with its permanently misshapen pupil, is a constant reminder of that night. He hasn't slept properly since. And ever since I heard this story, I'm terrified of deep woods. I haven't spoken to my friend or his dad in years now, but I still think about him every time I see a tree line stretch on longer than it should.
This happened last summer when I was 20 years old. My name is Kevin. My friend James comes from an absurdly wealthy family, the kind of wealth where their parents own multiple properties across the country and even a few internationally. His dad is some kind of high-level IP lawyer who contracts with the U.S. government. That's the level we're talking about. One of their houses sits on a large, secluded lake. The lake itself isn't massive. You can see the houses on the opposite side. But swimming across it would be brutal. It's wide enough to feel isolated, especially at night. Big homes line the shoreline, but most of them are dark and empty most of the year. Vacation houses, barely used. James's parents were almost never around, so with permission, he had pretty free access to the place. He'd throw insane parties there because there were usually no neighbors close enough to complain. But that night wasn't like that. It was just the two of us. I had just gone through a rough breakup, 3 years down the drain, and I really needed some time with a friend. No crowds, no noise, just beer, water, and quiet. We were sitting on the dock late in the evening, drinking and talking, when I noticed something strange across the lake. A light. At first, I thought it was the sun reflecting off a window or something metal, but when I shifted my head, the light didn't move. It was flashing. On, off, on, off. I pointed it out to James and we both watched it in silence. The longer we stared, the clearer it became. It wasn't random. There was a pattern. 3 short flashes, 3 long flashes, 3 short flashes. James snapped his fingers and said, "That's Morse code." I laughed and told him there was no way he actually knew Morse code. He said he didn't, but he knew what that pattern meant. SOS. I didn't believe him, so I pulled out my phone. He was right. The flashing continued for about another minute before stopping completely. The two of us just sat there, staring at the dark house across the water. Someone could have been in trouble. James immediately said we should call the police. I reminded him we'd been drinking, weren't legal yet, and I was already dealing with a DUI case. The last thing I needed was another police interaction. He wasn't happy with that answer, and neither was I, honestly. We tried to come up with logical explanations, a prank, someone messing around, but the SOS pattern made that hard to ignore. Eventually, we decided to check it out ourselves. If it was serious, we'd call the cops afterward. Inside the house, James grabbed a couple of switchblades from his brother's room. His brother was kind of weird like that, and we headed back outside. Driving around the lake wasn't an option. That left one choice, the kayak. At first, we laughed while dragging it into the water, hyped up by adrenaline and alcohol. But once we got farther from shore, neither of us was laughing anymore. The sun had almost fully set. The water was dark and still. Only a few distant house lights reflected off the surface. The house across the lake came into clearer view as we paddled closer. It was big, like the others, but it was in bad shape. The dock was partially collapsed, half submerged underwater, and the flashing light had stopped. That didn't feel like a good sign. We couldn't tie the kayak to the dock, so we beached it in the yard instead, careful not to slip on the rocks. Both of us were buzzing with adrenaline now. We knew the light had come from the second floor. James started freaking out and said we should leave and call the police. I reminded him we had no service on the lake and would need to paddle all the way back just to get Wi-Fi. I also reminded him we'd explored abandoned buildings plenty of times before. He wasn't thrilled, but he agreed. We didn't go to the front door. That felt suicidal. Instead, we circled the house until we found a window that was unlocked. We slipped inside. The house wasn't just abandoned, it was stripped. No furniture, no clutter, no signs of anyone ever living there. Bare walls, empty floors.
Nothing. We moved slowly through the room, searching for the stairs. Every room was the same, completely empty. Eventually, we found them and crept upstairs. We walked down the hallway toward the room where the light had come from. I pressed my ear to the door. Nothing. I looked at James. He nodded. I opened the door. The room was empty, except for one thing. By the window sat an old projector aimed directly outward. That's when everything clicked. This wasn't someone asking for help. This was bait. James realized it at the same time I did. He took off running down the hallway without even trying to be quiet. I followed. As we sprinted down the stairs, I heard a door swing open behind us, probably a closet, and then heavy footsteps pounding after us. We flew through the house and dove out the same window we'd come in through. James hit the ground running. I was right behind him. That's when James yelled something I didn't want to hear. The kayak was gone. I turned just in time to see someone rounding the side of the house, sprinting straight towards us. He was fast, big, definitely an adult. Pulled out my switchblade. James didn't. He jumped straight into the lake, fully clothed. I didn't think. I jumped in after him. The water was freezing. My muscles screamed immediately, but adrenaline took over. We swam toward the lights from James's house, which felt impossibly far away. Somehow, we made it. We dragged ourselves onto the dock, shaking uncontrollably. I've never been that cold in my life. We ran inside, locked every door, and called the police. It took them almost an hour to arrive. When they did, they took a boat across the lake and searched the house. When they came back, they told me what I expected. No one was there. They said the house had been abandoned for years. No signs of recent activity, no footprints, no equipment, nothing. They weren't happy with us, gave us the whole "you should have called first" lecture. James's parents were furious when they found out. I was never invited back to that lake house. To this day, I don't know who set that trap or why. Most people I've told agree on one thing. That projector wasn't meant to scare us. It was meant to see who showed up. And I really don't want to think about what would have happened if we hadn't run.